Loopback 4 was just released this October, and I'm super excited to talk about it. So, what is Loopback? Maybe you don't even know what Loopback is. Loopback is a framework for building APIs in JavaScript, specifically using Node.js. Okay, so why version 4? Well, before I get into that, let me give you a brief history of my experience with Loopback. So I come from a background of trying almost every single JavaScript API framework out there that exists. And of course, as you could guess, I've used Loopback 3 and version 2 actually in the past. But I did not like Loopback. I did not like Loopback. And the reason was it was so opinionated that I felt like I couldn't get anything done in their system. Anything that was beyond the scope of their magic, I couldn't do. So I ended up mainly just sticking with Trails for a long time. But recently, the maintainer of Trails, basically abandoned the project. And so when I decided to move on from Trails, I wanted a framework that was, that kind of had that power to it. And so I decided to take another look at Loopback, and lo and behold, version 4 is in beta. So I just really dig into Loopback version 4, and oh my goodness, it is amazing! You can probably guess there's a huge difference between version 3 and version 4. And there is. Loopback 4 is a complete rewrite of their framework. So, with that background, let's get into why you should be using Loopback 4. Loopback 4 is like Angular 2 was to Angular 1. And actually the analogy is actually kind of uncanny, because Angular 2 was a complete rewrite of Angular 1. And Angular 2, in their rewrite, they rewrote it using TypeScript. And Loopback 4, as you can maybe guess, uses TypeScript. I actually personally am really critical of TypeScript. I have this view that if you want to use a typed programming language, don't use JavaScript! Use another programming language that's actually typed at runtime. In this case, I actually am really happy that it's using TypeScript, and here's why. It can use this reflection using type introspection to figure out the types and to automatically do all of the validation for you. The other cool thing about using TypeScript is Loopback is able to build really powerful Swagger documentation, again, from the type introspection. But the fact that it leverages TypeScript in this really powerful way is not the only reason you should be using Loopback. Loopback is a lot more extendable and a lot more composable than Loopback 3 and previous versions. To understand that, it's kind of helpful to know about the design choices of Loopback. So Loopback, from its very conception, has always been built on top of Express. And the reason for this is Express is just this giant ecosystem. And so Loopback is kind of standing on the shoulders of this huge giant, and Loopback is able to focus on the aspects of the framework that make it really good without having to reinvent the wheel. The only way to really extend Express is through middleware, and you can't really control the order of the middleware. Well, you can. I've done it before. You can actually rearrange the middleware through this really hacky way of creating multiple Express apps and kind of injecting them into each other. But that's just disgusting. Loopback 4 decided to take a look at some of the other server frameworks in the Node ecosystem. And they experimented with Koa, and they actually even experimented writing their own server. They realized by recreating their own server, or by switching to a different server, they were losing all this power from this giant ecosystem of Express. So Loopback did a compromise. They implemented what they call in their documentation Express with a twist. So Loopback 4 actually is built on Express still, but the controllers are done completely differently. The controller implementation is their own implementation. And the way Loopback works, you really don't usually extend and compose it using middleware, but you can use hooks if you need to use some existing Express middleware and use it in Loopback. So that brings up an interesting question. How does Loopback handle its composability and extensibility? And it does this using dependency injection. Very, very powerful. So dependency injection basically takes classes or factories and gives the job of instantiating them to the system that you're working with. And that's powerful because it's very composable. So if you're coming from a Java Spring background, Loopback 4 actually is extremely familiar. In fact, I feel like, and I might be wrong here, but I don't think I am, I feel like Loopback 4 just stole a bunch of concepts straight out of the Java Spring framework. Okay, so another cool thing about Loopback 4 is it has decoupled API styles. So it is not opinionated about how the API communicates. So you could write your logic and your application and your controllers and later on down the road decide to switch to, instead of using JSON APIs, switch to GraphQL. Or you could offer multiple different ways of interfacing with your application. You could offer a GraphQL way of interacting with your application. You could offer a SOAP API. You could offer a REST API. And only really have to write your logic or your controllers once. Now, I would be completely failing to talk about why to use Loopback 4 if I didn't mention Loopback's greatest strength from the very creation of Loopback, and that is the Loopback's generator system. You still get the great generator support that came with previous versions of Loopback. So I can spin up new models, I can spin up new controllers, I can spin up new data sources, I can spin up new repositories, etc. I can spin this stuff up very quickly just through a generator in my command line. Loopback 4 is